Hello everyone, welcome back to another chess video. Today we're going to look at two more common chess tactics, the skewer and the fork. Let's start with the skewer, which is similar to the pin, which is the tactic we talked about last time. Skewers are a little bit less common than pins, but are still one of the most useful and essential tactics in the game of chess, so you should know them too. First off, we need to know what a skewer is. Think back to pins. When we talked about pins, we had a less valuable piece that we were attacking in front of a more valuable piece, which meant that the piece in front that we were attacking couldn't move. With skewers, the opposite is going to be true. So the more valuable piece in front that we're attacking is going to be in front of the less valuable piece. This means that while pins might only make things tough for your opponent, with skewers, most of the time you're going to be capturing something and gaining material. Because pins and skewers are so similar, some of the same concepts we talked about with pins are going to apply to skewers as well. For example, the most powerful type of pin is when you pin something to the king, because the pin piece cannot legally move. With skewers, the most powerful type of skewer also involves the king, because when we attack the king has to move out of the way, and we can capture whatever is behind it. Alright, now let's take a look at some positions and see how we can apply skewers to our games. The first way we can use skewers is to gain material. In this position I just showed you, we're white and we have a skewer with our rook through the king onto the queen. Once the king moves, we take the queen, and we're ahead of material. The important thing the skewer did here was that it forced the king to move out of the way so we could capture the queen. But what if a skewer doesn't involve a king? In this position, we have a skewer with our bishop through the rook onto the black knight. If we think back to our points, the rook is worth more than the knight. So black would have to move the rook out of the way and let us capture the knight behind it. Even though the rook wasn't being forced to move, it still did because losing the rook would have hurt more than losing the knight. Before we move on, let's do some puzzles. You'll be given a position where white can make a skewer in one move, and it's your job to find that move. In this position, we have a skewer if we move our bishop to g4, which skewers through the queen onto the rook. Black is forced to move the queen away, and we can take the rook and gain some material. In this position, we have a skewer with queen to d4 check, which skewers through the king onto the black knights. Once the king moves away, which it has to, remember, because it's in check, the queen can go in and take the knights and gain some material. This one's a little bit trickier, but the correct answer is knight captures g5, which has a discovered check from our rook on e1 that's also a skewer through the black king onto the black queen. The king is forced to move because it's in check, and we capture the queen, and we gain a lot of material. Skewers can also be used in other ways. For example, the threat of a skewer can limit your opponent's options. Let's take a look at an example of this. In this position, white's knight on f8 has no defenders, and black wants to capture it next move with their queen on g8. As white, we have no way to directly defend the knight in one move, and it also can't move out of danger. So how are we going to save the piece? Well, in this position, white can play queen to a1, b1, or c1, and I'm just going to use c1 here. And here's the idea. If black captures the knight the next turn, white can play queen to f1 with check, which actually skewers through the black king and onto the black queen. And once the black king moves, we capture the queen and gain a ton of material. As you can see from this puzzle, skewers aren't just offensive tools that we can use to win material, but can also be used defensively to defend your pieces or to stop your opponent from making certain moves. Now let's move on to the fork, starting with, what is a fork? A fork is whenever one of your pieces is attacking two or more of your opponent's pieces at the same time. And the idea here is that your opponent hopefully won't be able to defend both of them and you can capture one of them. Let's take a look at some positions to get the hang of it. In this position, black's queen and rook are separated from each other and can't defend each other. This means that we can play knight to e7. Now black is in trouble because they can only move one of the pieces out of danger. And likely they're going to choose the queen because it's worth more. But when they do, we can capture the rook and gain material. When you're using a fork, a lot of the time you're going to end up using your knight. Knights are excellent at forking because of their strange movement and the fact that they can jump over pieces, which lets them attack pieces that would normally be behind cover. Also, even if your knight gets recaptured at the end of a fork after you capture something, it's only worth 3 points, so most of the time you're going to be gaining material. Alright, let's take a look at another position. Notice how the black rook and queen are both on dark squares, and we have a dark squared bishop. This means that if we play bishop takes d6, we get to attack both the rook and the queen. Now from here, black has some options, but their best moves result in us taking the rook, and once they take back, we'll still have gained a material advantage. Bishops aren't as good at forking as knights are, but are still really good for them because of their low point value and their long range. Alright, it's time for puzzles. Keep in mind that when you're looking for forks, it can be useful to look at the movement of the pieces you have, look for squares where they could attack multiple of your opponent's pieces, and then try and find ways to get them there. In this position, the correct answer is knight to d6. This forks the king, queen, and rook, which is a pretty big fork. Now, when a king is part of a fork, it has to move because it's in check. So now we get to choose, do we want to take the queen or rook? The queen's worth more points, so we'll probably end up taking the queen. And just like that, we get a free queen. In this position, the correct answer is rook to d8 with check, and this forks the king and the queen. Now, once the queen captures a rook, we capture back with the bishop, and we just traded a rook for a queen, which is a good trade, because the queen is worth more than the rook. In this position, the correct answer is knight to f5. Now, if you were looking for squares where the knight could attack two pieces at once, you may have also seen that if the knight was on e6, it could attack both the bishop and the queen. However, we can't move it there because the king would just capture it, so it's not possible as a fork. Knight f5 works as a fork because it attacks both the king and the bishop, and the knight can't be captured by anything. So once the king does a move, let's say it goes to c7, we capture the bishop and we get ahead in material. Alright, that's going to be it for today's video. Like the pins we talked about last time, skewers and forks are very simple tactics, but they're still very important to know. Forks especially are very useful if you get good at using them because of how versatile and strong they are. Make sure to actively look for pins, skewers, and forks when you're playing your games, so that way you can get very quick at identifying them. Anyways, that's all I have for today, so I'll see you in the next video.